Everyone in the lecture hall fell silent the moment Professor Grant walked in. His reputation was well known, brilliant, but ruthless. Students whispered he loved exposing others' mistakes just to prove his superiority. That morning, a new face sat in the back row, Eli, a quiet transfer student with calm eyes and a notebook full of scribbles. When the professor noticed him, something in his expression shifted. "You must be the new student," Grant said coldly. "Let's see if you can handle my class." The students glanced at each other nervously. Eli simply nodded, polite but unshaken. The professor smirked and wrote a complicated calculus problem across the board, one so advanced that even graduate students struggled with it. "Solve this," he said, tossing the chalk. Everyone waited for Eli to panic, but he just stood, took the chalk gently, and studied the problem in silence. The clock ticked. A few chuckles echoed through the room. Then Eli began writing, his hand moving fast, confident. Within seconds, the once mocking laughter faded. His logic flowed flawlessly, every line precise. When he placed the chalk down, the board was a masterpiece of pure calculation. The professor's smile disappeared completely, whispers filled the classroom. Nobody had ever seen Professor Grant speechless before. Eli quietly returned to his seat, eyes down, as if nothing special had happened. But the tension was heavy. Grant cleared his throat. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, trying to regain control. He decided to challenge Eli again. "If you're truly a math genius, prove it next class. I'll prepare something fitting." Students could sense the bitterness in his voice. That evening, Eli sat alone in his dorm, remembering his late father, a mathematician who used to tell him, "Numbers never discriminate, son. People do." Those words gave him calmness. He wasn't here to prove his worth, he just loved math. But he also knew that tomorrow would test more than equations, it would test his patience, dignity, and strength. Meanwhile, Grant was in his office, rewriting problems with frustration. He couldn't admit it, but deep down, he was afraid. That student had solved something only he could solve. The next morning, the class was packed. Word had spread across campus about the new genius. Professor Grant entered with a smirk and a pile of papers. "Let's see if you can handle this one," he said, handing Eli a sealed envelope. Inside was an unsolved theorem, one even Grant had struggled with for years. Eli examined it quietly. "You can take your time," the professor said sarcastically, "maybe a few weeks." Eli looked up and smiled faintly. "I'll try now, sir." The class gasped. He walked to the board again, breaking down the theorem step by step, explaining each move as if teaching the room. His confidence wasn't arrogance, it was art. Equations flowed like poetry. Minutes passed, and suddenly, he stopped. "There," he said softly, "that should complete the pattern." When Grant checked it, his hands trembled. The logic was flawless. The impossible problem, solved in front of his own students. For the first time, the professor had nothing to say. After class, students surrounded Eli, thanking him for inspiring them. But Eli didn't bask in attention. He simply said, "Everyone learns differently. It's not about showing off." His humility only made people respect him more. Professor Grant watched from a distance, torn between pride and envy. Later, he called Eli into his office. "You think you're smarter than me?" he asked sharply. Eli shook his head. "No, sir. I just think differently." The professor's eyes narrowed. "You made me look foolish in front of my class." Eli hesitated, then replied softly. "I didn't mean to embarrass anyone. I just solved what was asked." That simple truth cut deep. Grant dismissed him, but that night he couldn't sleep. He stared at his own failed proofs, realizing the student he tried to humiliate had reminded him what real passion for learning looked like. Days passed, and the mood in the classroom changed. The professor became colder, more distant, giving impossible assignments. Some students whispered that he was trying to break Eli. But Eli handled each challenge with calm precision. His quiet determination inspired others. Soon, classmates began helping each other, something that had never happened before. One day, during a surprise test, Grant watched Eli guide a struggling student instead of racing to finish first. That moment caught him off guard. Later, when he graded the papers, he realized Eli had helped that student get the only passing score. The professor felt something shift inside him, guilt. He had spent years guarding his pride, but this student was teaching him humility without even trying. A week later, the dean announced a university math competition. The winner's formula would be published nationally. Grant instantly thought of Eli. Secretly, he wanted him to win, though he didn't admit it. During the contest, the problems were beyond advanced, but Eli didn't flinch. Hours later, his solution stunned every judge. The auditorium erupted in applause. Eli's name flashed on the screen, winner. Grant stood in the back, his eyes wet, clapping slowly. After the ceremony, he approached Eli. "You've earned something more than a medal," he said quietly. "You reminded me why I fell in love with teaching." Eli smiled, shaking his hand. "And you reminded me that even geniuses can still learn." For the first time, they both laughed together, teacher and student, equals at last. Months later, Eli's paper was published worldwide. Reporters called him the student who redefined calculus. But he stayed humble, continuing to study, still attending Grant's lectures. The professor had changed too, his tone softer, his lessons more about growth than grades. One day, he paused mid-lecture and looked at the class. "Learning," he said, "isn't about proving someone wrong, it's about discovering truth together." His eyes met Eli's, and both shared a knowing smile. The story of the boy who was underestimated and the professor who learned humility became a quiet legend on campus. Years later, when Eli became a professor himself, he often told his students, "Don't fear those who doubt you. Let your work speak louder than their words." And just like that, the student who once sat in the back row became the inspiration for generations who followed.